Today I'm going to show you how to make what is possibly the world's simplest to make UFO model in Blender. And we're going to start by finding a texture image for the outside of our spaceship. So we're going to go to whatever your web browser is. And we're going to go to Google and we're going to type in a single word, machinery. We're going to go to images, search tools, size, large, and you see we get lots of wonderful images of machinery, and you can pick any one that's just machinery and nothing else, like this or this or this. Doesn't matter if it's black and white. What does matter is the depth of colour. I quite like the look of this one. So if we view image, I like the look of this one because it's very complicated. There's kind of pipe shapes on it, there's a big fan thing, there's all sorts of different things going on this image. So I'm going to right click that image and I'm going to copy it to my clipboard, because this image at the moment is possibly a little too large. So I'm going to go to GIMP image editor, right click again, paste, and you don't really want a texture on something that's going to be fairly small. This ship is going to be not huge, so you don't really want textures that are much bigger than 1000 in any direction. So all I'm going to do is just resize this. Scale image, make sure that this is clicked, 1000, and what I want now is I want a new directory, so new folder, and I'm going to call this ship visit, because we're going to extend this first tutorial later on with a tutorial on how to make the planet Earth, or any other planet for that matter, and then a third tutorial on bringing it all together and actually making a scene out of it, an animated scene. So the next thing to do is to save this. So in GIMP you don't want to save it as it is, you want to export it. So it's export as. We'll find our directory, desktop, ship visit, and we're going to call it ship skin, something like that, it doesn't matter. And we're going to make it a JPEG image. Export, ta-da! That's that done, and we can close GIMP down because we don't need it now. So if we open the directory, we can see it's in there. So the next thing we want is we want to open Blender. So here we go. And the very first thing, we'll click outside the box to get rid of everything, and I want to save it. And it's save as, and it's going to go on the desktop, and it's the ship visit. Oh, I'm going to call this one just ship, because that's all it will have in it. Okay, let's get rid of our cube because we don't want him. And we're going to add in instead a sphere. So it's add, mesh, and we want a UV sphere because because it's the most sensible one. Now when you do this, down in the left, before you move anything or change anything else, at which point it disappears because it's too late, we can control how many segments there are in the sphere and how many rings around it. Now the segments are the slices that run vertically, and the rings are the slices that run horizontally. And I'm going to suggest that we put the number of rings up to 24 and the number of segments up to 64, like that. And that's that. And now we want to click on the scale handles, which is this little rectangular thing on the end of a line there, and you see you get the scales. And I'm going to scale this up. So I want to scale the whole, I don't want to scale the whole thing, I'm just going to scale it in the Z direction, because I want a flattened shape, like a flying saucer. So there you go. And is that flat enough, we ask? So by clicking the centre mouse wheel and moving it around, I can inspect what I've got, and by rotating the mouse wheel I can zoom out and I can zoom in. So we look at what we've got, and I don't think that's flat enough. That's more like it. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change the rim a bit because I want it a bit more pointed. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to select 2 vertices on one of the rings, and this is a shortcut. We'll go down to the select menu, and you see here select edge loop. Select that, and that's selected that ring of vertices all the way around. Stops you doing a lot of clicking and messing about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale that out, and the way you do that is hit the S key to scale, and there, that's scaled out. And now I want the ship flatter on the bottom than it is on the top, so we'll flip it over, and I'm going to select a whole bunch of vertices around here, which is one way of doing it, and that's not the way I'm going to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a thing called proportional editing. This allows us to affect vertices other than the ones that we've actually clicked on. So mesh, mesh, proportional editing, we want enable. Proportional editing fall off, check that that's selected as sphere. Then we want to select just the centre vertice by right clicking, and we'll go to our move handles, which are here. I'm going to rotate it slightly so I can see what I'm doing. Now you'll notice that now when you click on one of these move handles and it's in the Z direction, the blue direction, we're going to move it. So if I click on there, we've got a big circle appears, or a little circle, and that shows you what the sort of dimensions are being changed, how many vertices are being changed, what size your area is that affects the vertices. So we'll go back to a bottom view because I want to select a whole bunch, and I'm going to have to show you another key combination because basically it's very difficult to move in the direction of the screen, which is what we want to do with proportional editing. So the key combination I'm going to show you is G, and that's grab, and now you can see we've grabbed all this lot. We can move it around, but we don't want to move it around left, right, up and down. We want to move it in the direction of the screen, and the way we do that is by constraining it. And to constrain it, we just type in either X, Y or Z depending on what we want to constrain it to. In this case it's Z. So there we go. And that will keep those all selected. And we can move it a lot down, in which case obviously our flying saucer now has a concave bottom, which is not really what I want. I want it ever so slightly, so something like that. And don't forget, you can always undo if you screw it up. So there we go. You can always undo if you screw it up by hitting Ctrl Z. So that's our flying saucer shape, and that was painless, wasn't it? So now we're going to go to materials, but before I do that, actually, let's go into object mode. We're going to sort out a bit of lighting, otherwise in a minute we're not going to be able to see anything. Here's our light, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that a different light. So if we click here, that's the representation of a point light, and I'm going to make it a spotlight instead, and the default settings should work fine apart from energy, which we want to set up to about maybe 4, and that's it. And that's just so that we can see it when we come to look at it with our camera. So look at the positioning of the spotlight, it's fine as it is standard, no problems. So we'll select our UFO and we're going to apply material. So we want a new material, and it's up to you what colour you want to make it. I'm going to make it kind of almost a baby blue. And you'll see that what I've done is I'm going to make the intensity quite high. You see what I've done is that's a darker blue than the specular, but the specular is still blue, it's just a very light blue. And now, how much do you want it to glitter and gleam? If you want it to glitter and gleam a lot, you take that all the way up there. Same with hardness. If you look at the preview here, if you increase the hardness, that means that all the little details are going to shine. Whereas if you have the hardness all the way down, the whole thing will. So I suggest setting it somewhere in the 200 range. And the rest of this we don't really want. That's fine. I'm going to change the name of the material just to ship. Now, in the right hand box to that materials box, there's a textures box, and that's the next one we want, because we're going to add a texture that's going to bump the surface. It's not going to do anything else, and that's the texture that we've just created. So, new, we don't want clouds, we want image or movie. And if we scroll down, and before we scroll down, we want to click the both box, so we see the effect that it's going to have. And we want not new, which will open a new image to edit, we want open. And it's in the same directory, so just open the image. And there we go. We can see that at the moment it's affecting, if we go down here, it's affecting the colour. We don't want it to do that, unless you're particularly do. We might have a play with that later. And it also, it needs to affect the normal, but not by that much, maybe 5.3 or so. And you can see now we've got a ship with lumps on, but it's not very good because it's got the wrong projection, and we want to project it as a sphere. And now you can see we've got this image with kind of lumps, bumps, all sorts of wonderful things on. Maybe we can increase that normal a bit, up to maybe 0.5. Something like that. And maybe we do want to add a bit of colour in there, so we'll add a bit of the image colour, not all of it. We'll add maybe 0.3 or so. What does that look like? Maybe a bit more than that. 0.5. and we've got a little bit of colour variation, not too much. The other things you can do with images, you can scale them, and you can scale them in X, Y and Z as well. Might sound a bit strange to think about scaling a 2D image in Z, but it does work. You can also tile them. Now, if I was to take that up like that, you can see that we've now got our image is tiled. But unless your image is a completely tileable image, there are some out there, and there are ways of you making your own, then you're always going to get these artifacts like this where the images collide. So in general, it's better to try and avoid that if possible. Now if we go and do a trial render, you can see we've got quite a mysterious looking spacecraft. However, I've decided I don't actually like the colour of it, and I want to put even more sort of level of intricate detail in there. So I'm going to show hide render view, and I'm going to find another texture. So let's go back to our web browser, and this time I want like kind of a beaten copper. So if I put in beaten copper, and you can see we've got these wonderful images to choose from. Although how we managed to get the picture of a skull as beaten copper, I have no idea. And we might get a better choice if we put in beaten copper texture. And that's a kind of beaten copper texture, but is that really what we want? Because what I want is I want some colour variability across the ship. I want it to look scratched, used, old, and probably that one there is a very good. If we view image, that actually looks quite good. So I'm going to save that image. It's going to go into our file, ship visit, into our folder. I'm just going to call it copper. Oops. Minimize that again. And we're still in the same material. Now you will notice that you can actually have multiple textures. So if I hit new, so you can have multiple textures that affect the same material. We want copper, which is there. At the moment it's having a 100% effect on the colour. I'm going to turn that down a bit. So we still want our other colours to be visible. And it's having no effect on the geometry. I want it to affect the geometry, but not by so much maybe. Very good. And I'm going to have a lot of them. And of course we need to change the projection to sphere. And now what happens if we render image? It's got more complicated suddenly. Let's have a better look with the camera. Go to view camera. At the moment you can see one of the problems is it's quite small in our screen. We want to zoom in on it, and the easiest way to zoom in is to change the lens setting. So if we go into camera, click on the little camera picture, you can see we've got focal length of 35, and you can turn that up. It's like a zoom lens. So you get a better picture. And we can center it in the screen if we click the little box here. We can play around with the rotation, the location, and I think the location's okay, but I'm going to click down on the X and cross on the Y. Now it's in the middle of the screen, and we'll render it again. And there we go. In fact, I think what I want is I want a lot more of these plates, and I want to increase the effect of their colour. So, show hide render image. Go back to textures. At the moment we're 7 by 7. Make it 14 by 14. Going to increase that colour effect up to near 0.7 or so. Render image again. And you see we're building up layers, and it's starting to look like a strange alien spacecraft, which is of course exactly our intention. Now there's other modelling you could do as well. You could like add a sort of blister or cabin area to the top, but I'm keeping this simple. So I hope you've enjoyed this very short tutorial on how to build the world's simplest spacecraft. Thanks very much. Please like and subscribe if you find it useful.